Okay, good evening. Good evening to everyone. My name is Professor Itumeleng Mothoagae. I am a member of the Senate at St. Augustine College in Johannesburg. I'm also a member of staff at the University of South Africa in the College of Human Sciences, the School of Social Sciences, and I'm the head of the Department of Gender and Sexuality Studies, a newly created department at the University of South Africa. It is a pleasure to have each and every one of you here to this special occasion, in where we're going to hear a friend, a colleague, a brother, a mentor also, for those that do not know, a mentor also, doing some reflections on decoloniality and the importance of delinking, or rather, the importance of unlearning in order to relearn. And so, with that, colleagues, apologies for that. I'm in Zambia, and I think my wife was trying to get hold of me for something. So colleagues, we're here just to do some reflections, and we'll be led by Professor Sabelo Ndlovu-Gatsheni. And with that, I would like to hand over to Professor Thierry Sasko to welcome us officially to this auspicious occasion of academic and intellectual reflections. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Professor Itumeleng, and I feel very honored and privileged that Professor Ndlovu-Gatsheni agreed to this public lecture. It's a great honor to have you, and also to Professor Itumeleng Mothoagae, who, as he said, is on our Senate, and he's added a lot of deep reflections there and an important decolonial perspective that he brings to the Senate at St. Augustine College. So thank you very much. And I'm also delighted that we have you, the participants here, to join us at this illustrious event. And thank you for coming to St. Augustine and joining our community. And just to let you know that St. Augustine is deeply committed to the common good through pursuing integral ecological thinking, which includes a sensitivity to context, which then includes a challenge to the global north thinking and the epistemology that has come out of that, and to question and to challenge and to embrace what Professor Sabelo calls the pluriversal understanding of knowledge. So it's a wonderful experience, and also to say that our integral ecological thinking is embracing peace building in our very fractured world. So thanks for everybody coming. I can see their colleagues from WITS here and their colleagues from all over the country. So thank you very much. And we've got a student that's coming in that is a student of St. Augustine. We've got quite a few of our students. So thank you very much. And thank you, Itumeleng, for giving us a chance to welcome everyone.
Thank you so much, Professor Thierry. And without wasting any time, I would like to call upon Ms. Yvette Nayanga to please give us a poem of Maya Angelou. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Africa by Maya Angelou. Thus she had lain, sugar-cane sweet, deserts her hair, golden her feet, mountains her breasts, 2 Niles her tears. Thus she has lain, black through the years. Over the white seas, rime white and cold, brigands ungentled, icicle bold, took her young daughters, sold her strong sons, churched her with Jesus, bled her with guns, thus she has lain. Now she is rising, remember her pain, remember the losses, her screams loud and vain. Remember her riches, her history slain. Now she is striding, although she has lain.
Thank you so much, Yvette, for that beautiful poem. And without further ado, colleagues, it's always difficult to introduce a friend. It's always difficult to speak about someone, and I really requested Thierry that someone else does that, because I don't want Sabelo tomorrow to say, "Oh, my friend, you missed out this, you missed out that," and so on and so on. And with that, I'd like to ask Leluma Poshodi to please welcome and give a very brief resume of this illustrious academic, Professor Sabelo Ndlovu-Gatsheni.
Good evening, everyone. It's really an honor to introduce Professor Sabelo Ndlovu-Gatsheni. He's the professor and chair of epistemologies of the Global South, with emphasis on Africa, and vice dean of research in the Africa Multiple Cluster of Excellence at the University of Bayreuth in Germany. He holds professorships extraordinarius at University of South Africa and the University of Free State. He is a research associate at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, the University of Johannesburg, and the University of Pretoria, as well as the Ferguson Center for Africa and Asian Studies at the Open University in the United Kingdom. Professor Ndlovu-Gatsheni has authored over 100 publications, including 20 books. His latest books include Decolonization, Development and Knowledge in Africa, Turning Over a New Leaf, published in 2020, The Dynamics of Higher Education in the Global South, published in 2020, and co-edited with Busani Mpofu. The History and Political Transition of Zimbabwe, from Robert Mugabe to Mnangagwa, published in 2020, and Maxims and Decolonization in the 21st Century, Living Theories and True Ideas, published in 2021. You are welcome, Professor, and we are honored to be listening to you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Lemula Posholi, for the generous introduction. Thank you, Terry Sako, for the invitation. And thank you to my brother, Itumeleng, for chairing. If it was not for Terry, who was persistent, I was actually trying to escape from giving this public lecture. But she was so persistent that I said I needed to do it so that I pay my debt. I think one issue for certain is that I've moved from the continent to Germany, and this move has some implications for what I'm going to talk about, because from experience I've realized that the thinking about decolonization, decoloniality, and its politics, it depends on where you are located. and it actually influences your locus of enunciation. I used to present a lot when I was based in South Africa. The questions maybe were a bit different because of my location and the circumstances within that context. Now I'm this other side of the world, pursuing the same subject, but of course from another geospatial space. And I chose to speak about the politics of knowledge and the imperative of decolonization. And today, I want to focus on three issues. If I was available physically, I was not going to give a lecture. What I was going to do, I was going to have a conversation with colleagues at the St. Augustine College. And I like conversations because everyone knows something about decolonization. Everyone has been reading about it ever since the Rose Must Fall. It became a topical issue. So there are many opinions and ideas, and some have written also about it. So I'm not the only one who can actually propound on it. I could have actually preferred a round table so that we have a conversation on the pertinent questions. But because of other commitments, the best way is to be clear what I'm going to delineate what I'm going to focus on. I will focus on the contemporary politics of knowledge and its implications for research and scholarship. And I will try to pick what I consider to be the key issues in the contemporary politics of knowledge. I always think that is always a good starting point for the conversations. Then secondly, I will move on to the challenges of coloniality of knowledge and its influence on knowledge and the research and the scholarship. And finally, I will make reflections on on decolonization and also specifically on what does it mean to decolonize curriculum, or what should we do when we decolonize curriculum. Then I will stop. I think you would all agree with me that the dominant knowledge with which we understand and comprehend and interpret the world today is being questioned. Others think that it is actually exhausted. And to me, I think it is actually in crisis. And because of that, it has provoked us to ask important questions. And the existing theory of knowledge itself is being questioned, and our knowledge of knowledge is being challenged. And they were challenged as academics, and I'm thinking here as an academic, somebody who is embedded within the academy, within the university. And they were challenged to rethink our thinking itself. We are even challenged to move beyond rethinking, to unthink some of the ways in which we have been generating knowledge. We've been teaching, we've been writing about the world. We are challenged really to do what my friend Itumeleng spoke about, to engage in a painstaking process of learning to unlearn in order to relearn. Indeed, a process which actually speaks to the questions of whether we were miseducated and there is need for us to re-educate ourselves. But every time we speak that way, the fundamental Marxist question quickly emerges. who will educate the educators? That question is always standing and crying out for a response. But the key conundrum facing us in a time when there is uncertainties of knowledge, the question which really haunt the academy is how do we arrive at truth? I think the methods of arriving at truth are the ones which sometimes are being questioned. But in order to frame the contemporary politics of knowledge, I will briefly give you maybe 3 or 4 framings, beginning with the work of Claude Ake, who was a Nigerian political scientist who died in a plane crash in 1996, if I'm not mistaken. He wrote an old book. He wrote a book in 1979, and that book is called Social Sciences Imperialism. A book which I'm invoking here because I think by the time it appeared, it never received the attention it deserves. And when you have time, please go and check it. Because in that book, Claude Ake says every prognostication indicates that Western social science continues to play a major role in keeping us subordinate and underdeveloped. It continues to inhibit our understanding of the problems of our world, to feed us noxious values and false hopes, to make us pursue policies which undermine our competitive strength and guarantee our permanent underdevelopment and dependence. So I'm just giving you a taste of what is in that book, and I will encourage you to have a look at it. The second one, which I think can frame our understanding of the contemporary politics of knowledge, is actually the one written by Immanuel Wallerstein, whom I would define as a sociologist of knowledge. And the book which I'm referring to is actually entitled The Uncertainties of Knowledge, and it was published in 2004. And in that book, Wallerstein says, I believe that we live in a very exciting era in the world of knowledge, precisely because we are living in a systemic crisis that is forcing us to reopen the basic epistemological questions and to look to structural reorganization of the world. I think what emerges from Wallerstein's argument, what are those reopened epistemological questions, and I will try to reflect on those. But the contemporary politics of knowledge also have broader implications for institutions and for governance of the institutions and for the way we conceive the broader domain of knowledge. And in order to get an insight into that, I will also recommend the work of Adebayo Olokoshi and Paul Tiambezeleza. There are 2 books which they wrote on higher education in Africa, and they were published by Codesria in 2004. In volume 1 of those books, they actually map out the challenges, because here we are talking about ourselves as academics, but we're also talking about the institutions in which we work. An institution like St. Augustine College of South Africa, an institution which needs also to express and position itself within the contemporary politics of knowledge. So what Zeleza and Olukoshi say is that the challenge facing institutions in the leadership of the institutions is how to balance autonomy and viability, expansion and excellence, equity and efficiency, access and quality, authority and accountability, representation and responsibility, diversification and differentiation, internationalization and indigenization, global presence and local anchorage, academic freedom and professional ethics, privatization and public purpose, teaching and research, community service and consultancy, diversity and uniformity, the preservation of local knowledge system and the adoption of global knowledge systems, knowledge production and knowledge dissemination, knowledge economy and the knowledge society. I thought these actually give us three entries which actually frame what we are going to talk about as the contemporary politics of knowledge. But some will ask, why are we focusing on the politics of knowledge? There is a debate in decolonial studies that in the decolonial struggles that perhaps we are making a mistake by privileging the epistemic ahead of all other things. But when people privilege one particular issue, it doesn't mean that they ignore other issues. So when we speak about the epistemic question, it doesn't mean that we're saying the material question, the existential question, the justice question, and all these other questions are not important. We are not saying that. We are not actually reducing everything to one question, but we are saying this is another important question, particularly at the present moment. And this question becomes important for a number of reasons. The first is that there is a strong school which says that knowledge frames reality. In other words, epistemology frames ontology. And because of that, it is necessary to really understand the politics of knowledge itself. And with these few words, I want to then turn to the actual issues in the contemporary politics of knowledge. And what I'm going to do quickly, I'm going to identify those reopened epistemological questions because of resurgence and the insurgence of decolonization, because of what some call the return of the culture wars, because of what some call the woke consciousness of politics. There is a return of the basic epistemological questions to haunt the academy. And the task before us as academics, as intellectuals, as people working within the institutions of higher learning, is to distill what are those basic epistemological questions which have returned. And they are saying they've returned. They are not saying they are new. In other words, they've returned. They've always been there, these questions. And the issue is that perhaps they were not answered adequately. And what are those questions? From my own research, I've tried to identify maybe 6 of them. The first one is the question of where does knowledge come from? The second one is there any connection between knowledge and identity? And the third one, does knowledge have a geography? And the fourth one, does knowledge have a biography? What is the role of experience in knowledge? Is there any role of experience in knowledge? And then the fifth one, what is the link? Is there any link, if any, between knowledge and ideology? And the sixth one, what is the impact of technology on knowledge? I think those are to me, the 6 basic epistemological questions which have returned into the academy. I think the technological one is actually an emergent question. It might not be returning, it is actually emerging. The more we use technologies, the more we need to ask, what is this impact on knowledge, and what is its implications on knowledge? Of course, I'm not here to answer these questions. I'm here to pose them so that they frame our conversations tonight. Or for instance, the first question, where does knowledge come from? It takes us to very complicated philosophical issues of the relationship between matter and the idea, between mind and body. And the one on identity and the knowledge, it takes us to very deep issues of objectivity, scientific detachment, disembodied knowledges, that we need not to privilege our identities in order to attain objectivity, in order to be scientific, in order to attain detachment, and in order to disembodied, to produce disembodied knowledge. That is one way of approaching it. And then when it comes to geography, there is also a strong argument that let's not privilege geography. Let's actually produce knowledge which is objective, truthful, and universal across space and time. So there is that standing argument. Then when it comes to biography and experience, again, the red flag of objectivity, impartiality, being scientific is raised. And for me, a person like me who is trained as a historian, I know one of the no-go areas during my training was to say I or we in writing historical work. That was deemed to be a sign that you are very subjective. And then when it comes to ideology and knowledge, I think there is a consensus that knowledge is political. Even Michel Foucault talked about power-knowledge dynamic. So the question of being neutral, I think, is no longer sustainable. Then when it comes to technology and knowledge, there is always this question which says, but for every technology, there must be a cosmology and an epistemology, which actually anchors them. But what I want to flag is what then is the position of the decolonial and the post-colonial thinking on these issues. Already on question number one, I've said that when it comes to where does knowledge come from, you will find that scholars like Walter Mignolo, Catherine Walsh, they emphasize the issue that epistemology frames knowledge. And they raise this within a context in which they are trying to find an exit from an egg-chicken type of debate. Which is it meta? Is it epistemology? Is it ontology? Those philosophers will understand that better than me, a historian. But the idea that knowledge frames ontology actually gives one a window out of that chicken egg debate. And then when it comes to the question of identity and knowledge, of course, in the decolonial and post-colonial thinking, there is a clear idea that we are imbricated and implicated in the knowledges in which we produce. In other words, there is something which is called the eco-politics of knowledge. And there is something which can be called the body politics of knowledge and the embodied knowledges, which actually makes those working in decolonial scholarship and the politics emphasize the issue of locus of enunciation. Then there is when it comes to geography and its relationship to knowledge, in the decolonial and post-colonial thinking, there is a clear idea that knowledge has a geography, that there is something called the geopolitics of knowledge and the geography of knowledge. And from a feminist point of view, you will understand the standpoint as well as situated knowledges, which also reinforce the idea that we think from somewhere, or think from where we are, as some would say. And then when it comes to biography and experience, you will understand that there is strong contestations within the knowledge domain, with some thinking that such fields as decoloniality, such fields as post-colonial studies, such fields as intersectionality studies, queer studies and all these, they are criticized as driven by what they call identitarianism, that they are not scientific, they are subjective, and therefore they need others. They think they need actually to be banned from the academy. But from a decolonial and post-colonial point of view, there are points which we actually glean from to think about biography and experience of knowledge. And these concepts are concepts like body politics of knowledge and the embodiedness of knowledge. And the idea that when we talk about biography of knowledge, we're actually talking about who produces the knowledge. And one issue which is clear, whether you are thinking about Eurocentric knowledge or you are thinking about knowledge in Africa, you will find that the dominance of men in the production of knowledge. They dominate. Women, whether in the Eurocentric or in the African knowledge, they are actually few. And then obviously you will find that when it comes to theoretical work and all this, you will find that maybe the dominance is the dominance of dead white men, so to speak. And the idea in decolonial thinking is that we need to shift not only the geography of knowledge from Europe and North America as the dominant generative centers of knowledge, but also to shift biographically from men to also include women, from dead white men to also take into account the living who continue to produce knowledge, and also to take into account other thinkers, not only from Europe, but also from Africa, from Asia, from Latin America, and from the Caribbean and other parts of the world. I've already said that when it comes to ideology and knowledge, there is consensus on that there is power dynamics in knowledge. But there is also something emerging. I'm not sure whether in South Africa is a contentious debate, but where I'm based here at the University of Bayreuth and in Germany in general, there is a contestation between some of us who are working with the decolonial frameworks. And the critique is that the knowledge which we produce is ideologically driven. And this is just opposed with those who claim that the knowledge they produce is scientifically driven. So in other words, theirs is objective, ours is subjective. And that takes us to very deep epistemological issues, because in order to claim that you are producing scientific knowledge, that the only way you can make such a claim is to hide who you are, hide your identity, hide your geography, hide your gender, hide your race, hide your sexuality, hide so many things, and they say, I'm just producing knowledge scientifically. But in the decolonial work, we always put ourselves on the table. For instance, when Leluma Posholi introduced me, I could quickly have said to my brother, you know what? You are introducing my profession, me as a professional person. You are not introducing me. I'm a black man. I'm from Zimbabwe. I'm heterosexual. Again, these are not other identities which I carry. And these identities, more than maybe my professional identities, they actually influence the work which I produce. You get my point. As I said, I'm not here to really answer those questions, but to pose more challenges for us to think through this contemporary politics of knowledge. But that was a summary of what I think are the contemporary the coordinates of the contemporary politics of knowledge. And the issue is, what do they take us to? I think one issue for certain, which I'm trying in my own work to project, is that should we not think knowledge in this way, that there are some knowledges which are knowledges for concealment of things, vis-a-vis some knowledge which are knowledges for revelation. And I'm always putting on Facebook that my knowledge is an attempt to reveal things, is not to conceal things through nuance, through claims of objectivity and all this. I'm trying to reveal some of the injustices, some of the inimical processes which actually created this problematic world. And the second point, which actually emerges from here, comes from Linda Twice-Smith. And he answers this question about who does the research. And according to her, if, for instance, it is South Africans researching South Africa, she alerts us to this, that the questions will actually change because they are looking at the problem from the inside. And this is her argument, and I think it is an important argument to share with all of you. She says, when indigenous people become researchers, not merely the researched, the activity of research is transformed. Questions are framed differently. Priorities are ranked differently. Problems are defined differently. And the people participate on different terms. And then the third lesson which I want to share, emerging from what I've said, comes from Ngugi wa Thiong'o. And this relates to theorizing. And the Ngugi wa Thiong'o, a lot of people, when you speak about Ngugi wa Thiong'o, they just think about decolonizing the mind, that book of published in 1981 first time and in 1986. But Ngugi wa Thiong'o is a moving thinker who has been producing a number of works since that time. One of the books which I will recommend from him is the one entitled Globaletics, which was published in 2012. And the first chapter of that book is entitled Poor Theory. And it is a chapter which a lot of people can jump. That is he talking about poor theory? What is poor theory or poor theory? But Ngugi's idea is that poor theory may simply remind us that the density of words is not the same thing as complexity of thought. That such density sometimes can obscure clarity. But what Ngugi is talking about when he talks about poor theory, he talks about theory from the ground, vis-a-vis what he calls kite theory, theorizing which is running above our heads, drawn from other contexts which are not where it is supposed to enlighten the data. And he's talking also about poor, and I quote him here, poor means extremely creative, experimental in order to survive. The homeless try to make a home anyway, even in places that do not suggest a home. A person without the wherewithal to buy clothes will pick pieces of cloth of whatever color, size, and shape, and bring them together. He is clearly not worried about matching colors to please the eyes of an imagined critic of a cocktail party. Necessity drives him to yoke into one, a functional one, the different colors, shapes, and sizes. The poor person is unintentional daring and experimentation comes from the necessity, which is the mother of all inventions. In other words, he is inviting us as academics, as intellectuals, even as activists, to actually learn from how the poor live, and they theorize from that experience, and they develop theory from that. These were my first reflections on part one of my presentation. I'm now moving to part two of my presentation. And the part two of my presentation is actually on coloniality of knowledge. And this one becomes necessary for us to reflect on, because in order to decolonize knowledge, you must first of all know how it was colonized. You must also be convinced that knowledge can be colonized. If you are not convinced by that, how will you talk about decolonizing knowledge? So I think it is important that we reflect briefly on personally, I understand that knowledge can be colonized. And I think the first entry point to understand that, you can even go to the work of Steve Biko, the Black Consciousness movement leader, who said the most important weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the control of the minds of the oppressed. And immediately you get that statement, the matter arising or the question arising, how do other people control minds of others? And I think that can actually give us an entry into this question of how knowledge is colonized. And you will find a philosopher like Veni Mitova, who is based at the University of Johannesburg, saying, we live in an epistemically colonial world. That is no secret. She is so confident. We live in an epistemically colonial world, and that is no secret. And you will find scholars like Ali Mazuri saying, what Africa knows about itself, what Africa knows about different parts of Africa, has been profoundly shaped by colonialism. And in order to think through this, I then introduce or mobilize these concepts like cognitive empire. I think the cognitive empire is a better term to understand the issue of coloniality of knowledge. You can think about the physical empire, the commercial empire, but I think the most important one for the knowledge domain is what we call the cognitive empire. An empire which invades the mental universe of its targets, in the process imposing particular knowledge systems, displacing others, and consequently shaping a particular consciousness. And this empire, if we want to understand it well, I think Ngugwathiongo speaks about it in terms of the metaphysical empire. And I think Ashish Nadi from India speaks about this same empire in terms of intimate enemy. And then there are many others with different names to try to name it, this empire. But what is important, I think, for operational purposes in the knowledge domain is to understand the technologies which this empire uses to colonize knowledge. I think the first technology we draw mainly from the Latin American school of the Latin American school, which is called the modernity coloniality. And that one, actually, I think more than other schools, it gives us 4 or 5 concepts which actually name the technologies through which this empire invades the mental universe of the world, and particularly of its targets. The first concept being the concept of coloniality of being, which is predicated on social classification of human population, racial hierarchization of human population, and the gendering of human population. In the process leading to the invention of people with the differential ontological densities, and also the production of an invisible social pyramid in which those who have white skins, they are at the top, those with brown underneath, then those with black next, and then the natives really at the bottom. And this social pyramid is invented, of course, from a sociological point of view. You can say social classification. No, this is an important concept because it actually the ordering of the world. But I don't think the intention was just to order. There were also other intentions. You use this pyramid in order to identify who to enslave, who to subject to genocide, and who to exploit, and how to evolve a racial capitalist system, and how to institute what we call international division of labor. But it has also implications on knowledge, because those who are classified as subhuman and non-beings are said to have no knowledge. And this takes us to coloniality of knowledge, whereby immediately your being is questioned, your being human is questioned, or you are pushed to below the ladder in the pyramid into subhuman category. You are said to have no knowledge at all. And then this also takes us to coloniality of languages, in which this empire also imposes its own languages on these targets, and it displaces the indigenous languages. And of course, because it has created this social pyramid in which it pushes other people into different levels, the people do not accept that. They resist that because they know that they are human beings like all other beings, even in their different colors, in their different genders, in their different sexualities. So in order to maintain that invisible social pyramid, they needed to have coloniality of power, in which you subject them and force them to actually accept this. This is where coloniality of power actually then intervenes. And the coloniality of power is then predicated in what Equiano and Walter Mignolo call colonial matrix of power, which is the management device of what is invented. Then the second important issue in this second section is the issue of the global economy of knowledge. I think all of us today, we operate within what is called the global economy of knowledge. And some think that because we operate in the global economy of knowledge, it means that we are now working together, we are now living in a network society, we are now engaged in partnerships and collaborations. I wish things were like that, but there are still issues which were identified by the Benin philosopher Pauline Muntoji, that within the global economy of knowledge, there is an even intellectual and academic division of labor. And in a 1990 article, he identified 13 indices of academic dependence, how Africa is academically dependent. And he identified these indices of dependence, which reflect the uneven intellectual and academic division of labor. But I can actually reduce this to praxis, because I also developed my own intellectual career while I was based in South Africa on the continent. And what I know from the vantage point of thinking from that space is that Africa remains really a site for hunting and gathering for raw data, what we call empirical data. From where I'm standing now, every summer my colleagues move from here into Africa, particularly I'm in the anthropology department. They move into Africa for field work to hunt and gather data. So the unevenness there is that they hunt and they gather raw data, bring it here, process it into concepts, into theories, into models, into theorems, and then it is consumed in the continent. So there is still that disjuncture between who theorizes who produces the theory and who consumes the theory. And also, I've seen it practically. I supervise masters, PhDs, and honors students here. Most of them, they work on Africa, if not all of them. And they go and they gather data in Africa. But every time they are asked about the theoretical framing of their work, they run to North America, they run to Europe to draw theory from there. And we need to think carefully about that. Then we also, I think all of you who are academics and who are writing and publishing, you know the challenge and the pressure, and in fact the compulsion, if I can put it that way, that you must publish in international peer-reviewed high-impact journals. And those international peer-reviewed high-impact journals, they are headquartered somewhere. They are headquartered in Europe and in North America. And they monopolize the category of international. You can't say if I'm in South Africa and I publish in Argentina, then it is international. International doesn't work that way in the publications, in the knowledge domain. International is Europe and North America. And that also still shows the power imbalances. And I don't want to also talk about the other important issue, all the work which we publish in the so-called international peer-reviewed high-impact journals is actually in the 6 colonial languages which were imposed on Africa. So there is that, and you will find that even in African studies, the Africa-based scholars are actually marginal in the study of Africa itself. The canonical knowledge which drives African studies is produced by what West and Martin call the Africanist enterprise, the endowed, well-funded Africanists who study Africa from outside, and they have access to the dominant presses and the international journals, and they drive the logics in that. So there is that, and all this. What we need to then do after we've done this diagnosis, we need to say what are the implications. I think the implications, there are various implications. If you go to Nguki wa Thiong'o, he will tell you that one of the implications is that some people surrender to this. And when they surrender to this, they therefore decide to even change their names, to change their, to lose confidence in their struggles, in their unity, in their capacities, and they just become mimic people. And he says also the impact of this is that the cognitive empire then, he is so vivid because he says it works like it removes the hard disks of previous memory and the knowledge, and it downloads into the software of us a European memory and the knowledge. And he says the consequence of this is that then it dislocates the mind of its targets to the extent that they remain physically located maybe in South Africa, in Zimbabwe. But when you listen to them speak and you see what they are producing, they are producing it as though they are based in London. They really think about the continent from outside. So they traveled epistemically while the bodies remained there, or the mind was pushed to outside the context, and it produces knowledge that way. So you will find that even our social location, our epistemic location, and our geographical location are very problematic. For instance, Grossvogel says the fact that one is socially located on the oppressed side of relations does not automatically mean that the person is epistemically thinking from the subaltern location. And he says precisely the success of modern colonial world system consists in making subjects that are socially located in the oppressed side of colonial descent to think epistemically like ones in the dominant position. And the consequences, you can go back to W.E.B. Du Bois about double consciousness. You can go back to Carter Gordon Woodson on miseducation. You can go back to Al Mazuri about cultural schizophrenia. You can go back to Fanon about pitfalls of national consciousness. And it also has direct implications in what we produce. And the one is that we have colleagues within the academies, within the continent, who decide to emulate, to radically emulate and assimilate to the notions of objectivity, constitutedness, universal, the protocols of excellence in order to produce knowledge, which is not something wrong, but you need to understand its implications and whether it really takes you in the direction towards truth or far from truth. Then you have others who decide to engage in what I think is Sepomalingos called the liminarity, the in-betweenness, trying to be in between the standard sets somewhere and also the imperatives of where you are located. Then we have others who get very angry and then they decide to rebel in another direction, which is very problematic, a direction whereby they are trying to reject so many things as Eurocentric. And therefore, they then say, we have our own ways of producing knowledge. Fair and fine, but it must not take us to a corner in which we then fall into nativism and ghettoization, whereby we then decide to cut ourselves from the world of knowledge. I think we need to be careful there. Then you have others, maybe in countries like Zimbabwe, Nigeria, where the economies have collapsed and all these other issues, that you will find some intellectuals who are surviving through what I would call the psychophatic tradition. And the psychophatic tradition is just to make those in power happy. You produce opportunistic scholarship, which is always to make those in power happy, so that you pick the crimes or they give you the crimes. And at the international level, you also position yourself in what I would call compradorial position. You are not clear what exactly are you pursuing, what exactly do you stand for. You don't stand for anything, you stand for something which you think will make you survive. So those are some of the implications which I can make. Then as I move to the last part, I think we then, having said this, what then are the contents of the decolonization? I think I've made the case for how colonized knowledge is. But when you want to think about decolonization, we must know that already there is a pushback. And the pushback is that decolonization has become a buzzword. Decolonization has become a slogan. Decolonization has become a metaphor. Others, they are saying decolonization is actually wrong-headed. But I still believe that it is our duty to respond to this by actually putting content in what we mean by decolonization and why we think it is necessary. And I think one content which we need to put is that there are existential questions within the struggle for decolonization. A people with a question to humanity, this is a reality. It is not yet over. This is why you will find the Black Lives Matter movement in this century still fighting to preserve the lives of Black people. So the lives are still cheap compared to other lives. And then there is the material question. The material question which speaks about deliberate destitution whether some think it is a feeling or not, but it has historical grounds. The destitution of deliberate destitution through systems such as enslavement, colonization, capitalism, neo-colonialism. And then the historical question, which is the question of the people who are said to have no history, who every day they need to prove that they have history. And the whole history departments in the Ibadan school was to prove that the work of Sheikh Anta Diop was to challenge the Hegelian idea and the philosophy of history by proving. And the question is not about saying we have history. It looks like the question of history is the question whether you are human or not. And then you also have the epistemic question. I think I've put that one more clearly. And then you have the identitarian question. People who are defined by others and who are struggling to define themselves. And this actually leads to the overarching question of self-determination, which I think are important aspects. And I want to end, therefore, by looking at, having said all this, one of the questions which I know in the South African context is the question of how do we decolonize the curriculum? And I think having said this, we can now then consider some of the positions which we can take. I think one issue for certain in relation to what is called Eurocentrism, because once you pose that term, that the problem is Eurocentrism, people ask you, what do you mean by that? I think one simple way of talking about it is the overrepresentation of knowledge from Europe in theory, in education, in everywhere, and the underrepresentation of knowledge from other parts of the world, and the decolonization which we speak about in terms of moving the center, in terms of shifting the geography, in terms of shifting the biography of knowledge, is really to rectify this. And this rectification is not a nationalist romantic idea. It actually becomes necessary now when knowledge has been hit by uncertainties, when the knowledge is no longer able to actually predict the problems such as the global financial crisis, predict problems like the COVID-19. When it is doing that, the knowledge is exhausted. So there is need to mobilize the knowledge of the world in order to actually help humanity move out of the crisis in which it finds itself. Then the other thing which we can do practically, when we have done all this diagnosis, we need to make a prognosis. I always work with the metaphor of the work of medical doctors, that they do diagnosis in order to prescribe. You can't prescribe without correct diagnosis. So we always do diagnosis, and they are not disconnected. Prescription and diagnosis are not, you can't have one without the other. So it's important that all the diagnosis which we're trying to build up into prescription. And the one prescription in the domain of curriculum is that we need to review the disciplinary base of our knowledge. And this review of the disciplinary base of our knowledge even emerges in the work of Michel Foucault, when he says modern disciplines emerged at a particular moment in modern history to solve particular problems. The issue is the problems of today. In our disciplines up to speed with the problems of today, or the problems of today, they have gone ahead of us. The disciplines are going in another direction. And what we need to do is to go back to our disciplines to check their constitutive formation, what was their purpose, their fitness for purpose, the relevance, the value for money for those who pay to come and study under us. And that review will actually say, should we continue with the disciplinary based knowledge, or should we open up beyond disciplines. Maybe disciplines are now giving a very, very limited understanding of problems. And then when it comes to theory, we need also to decolonize a theory. And to decolonize theory means you must analyze the normative foundation of each theory. What is the normative foundation of each theory? And I remember that Allen, what is her name? Allen, she wrote this book on decolonizing the normative foundation of critical theory in 2016. And her argument is that he gave the example of critical theory as produced by the Frankfurt School. And they said they were producing critical theory. But unfortunately, that theory, which was critical, but it never reflected on racism, on enslavement, and on imperialism and colonialism. And her argument is that it was like that. I think the first person to pose that was actually Edward Said, who said, no, it doesn't mean that the Frankfurt theories were a problem in themselves. It is because of the normative foundation of their theorizing. If it is founded on salvation, on progress, on an idea of civilizing, the idea of development and emancipation, basically, colonialism will look like a progressive thing. Enslavement will look like a progressive thing. Hence, they lost sight of it. And one of the issues is we do this decolonization in order to achieve what? And the issue which in the academy we need to think about is not to throw away what we call Eurocentric knowledge. It is not adequate, but it is still important. And because it is still important, what are we supposed to do? We need to bring other knowledges into the academy so that we establish what we call ecologies of knowledges. I thank you.
Wow. It's always a pleasure to listen to you, Sabelo. It's always a pleasure. Let's give him a round of applause again. Yes, the son of the soil. Yes, so colleagues, I would have loved to summarize everything that you were saying. But I think in a nutshell, what Sabelo is raising is how do we begin to think in what McDonald would refer to as border thinking. Having the two dimensions with us, not throwing one out of the other, but seeing how the two can have a proper conversation, a conversation that is equal, but not a conversation that is determined by other forms of knowledge. And I think here in type of Sabelo, the type of work that I do, which you are very much familiar with, the importance of reading 19th century material with the eye of being a Black person, and the performance of power in the distortion of the knowledge production and the manipulation of the audiences by those that were writing. And that becomes very important, that even the 19th century material that formed the basis of what today we would call certain disciplines and also certain understandings about Black people in particular, that we begin to read them with a critical mind from a social and epistemic location of who we are as people. And I appreciate the fact that you've raised very, very important issues around how, as Africans, we ought to be very, very careful to not find ourselves being weaponized. And here I thought, I looked and thought of a sociology such as Jean and John Komaroff. We quote over and over and over again. They become the goddess and the god of sociology, and have done so much work amongst the Botswana, and yet they don't live amongst the Botswana, and yet they become the authority amongst and about the Botswana. And therefore it becomes critical that even when we read those works, that we've got to read those works with a critical eye. Not because we want to discredit them, but to say, what is it that they are doing? And how are we to critically engage with them and say, you are missing the point in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah.
And here you are really correct when you say in the language on its own, the fact that now we're engaging on the foreign language on its own, it basically tells us about the politics of knowledge and how knowledge unfortunately, because we are colonial beings, what Nopolo will call colonial subjects. We are colonial subjects. And because we're colonial subjects, we cannot eradicate ourselves from being those subjects of coloniality and continue to be subjects of coloniality. So, colleagues, I have started a debate, I suppose, to really engage with Comrade Sabelo, Brother Sabelo, and perhaps maybe get to clear up some of these things, and in particular, the context in which St. Augustine as a college, which is not just a college, but an ecclesiastical college, which in a way has got to continually battle with this identification of its being founded and with a particular ethos, with a particular mandate to fulfill. And yet at the same time has got to respond to the continental and to the South African situation. And in those, how do you maneuver around that as an institution that is supposed to be advancing a particular ethos, a particular belief, which is a Roman Catholic identity and so on, and how you, as an institution, you have to negotiate this colonization of knowledge of that you continue to face on daily basis, and yet at the same time trying to decolonize the very curriculum that you offer. And so perhaps maybe let's engage colleagues, let's engage those that are there. I see Justin has raised his hand. Justin, you may take the floor.
Thank you, Prof Sabelo. I really appreciate your talk. It reminds me of the words of Jeremiah Mothoagae, who said, what's the difference between a university in Africa and an African university? And my question at base is, we in South Africa, I'd say, are in the movement of decolonizing the curriculum, incorporating different thinkers and from various backgrounds, particularly from South African backgrounds, changing the approaches in which we teach and so forth. But the one thing that hasn't really changed is the assessments and the way in which we grade students. I think that this is something that, we look at the decolonizing the curriculum, but we don't look at this aspect. I'm curious about, I don't expect you to have an answer, but maybe it's part of a discussion. But I'm curious about that because it funnels its way upward. Because as you said, we're teaching the teachers, but we're also teaching the future scholars. And I remember like so-called international journals, they'll reject my papers out of hand if I have an African name in the title. Like, I even try to publish in like Veredu or Serqueba, even like famous people. And they would say like, this is not what we do, even though they're a so-called international journal that accepts a diverse point of view. And then I've also had people who come to me after conferences, particularly a conference here in South Africa on critical theory, who basically said, Serqueba is not a real philosopher. So, and there's a criterion, and it begins with our education, tertiary education, how we assess. but it always moves up. And this even goes to the NRF, who prize so-called international publications over other publications. At base level, what do you think about how one could decolonize the assessment portion of the curriculum, which often goes underaddressed and has bad consequences, as I've just mentioned?
Okay.
Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Justin, for these pertinent questions. Obviously, I've always avoided giving answers. What I prefer is just to give you a response, and a response to me is lighter than to promise to give you an answer. I think, Justin, the first thing which we need to think about is that this struggle which we're involved in, which is called decolonization, is not new. And what is it that is new that we're doing now, which we did not do in the 60s and 70s? I think one issue is that in the 60s and 70s, we wanted to be part of the game. We wanted to be included in the game, using Fanon in the European game. But I think what in the words of my colleague at the University of South Africa, Odora Hoppers, the challenge of today is to change the rules of the game, is to question actually the rules of the game. And it is in the questioning of the rules of the game that we go into curriculum, we go into epistemologies, we go into scholarship, we go into pedagogies, we go into assessment, and they begin to say the assessment which really penalizes people because of the language, because they are not competent in the languages, and then they are deemed to be incapable on that basis. Is it a fair assessment in the first instance? And of course, the shift also from negative assessment to positive assessment. Negative assessment, I still see it many times when we're evaluating master's, doctoral proposal. I always intervened. I said, colleagues, let's not start by looking for what is wrong in these things. Let's look for what is right first in order to affirm the candidates. And then we will raise the negative at the end. But generally, the approach was to start with you are wrong here, you are wrong here, you are wrong here, you are wrong here. And then somebody loses whole confidence, he thinks everything is wrong. So, but pedagogically, I think the shift from negative assessment to positive assessment, in which you first of all identify what is it that is good about what is in front of you, before you start by looking for what is wrong. There are people who are so stuck in this negative assessment, and they think that is the only way to assess. And I will also reflect on a practical attempt which we try to do. I think Itumeleng might know about it. In the last 5 years, when I was at the University of South Africa, I was working in the Vice Chancellor's office in a unit called, initially it was called Change Management, and later it was called the Department of Leadership and Transformation. This was an office born out of the efforts of the Rhodes Must Fall and the Fees Must Fall movements. And this is an office which was supposed to really lead and catalyze the decolonization of the university in terms of its institutional culture, in terms of the demographics of the professoriate, the gender dynamics, to curriculum, to student experience, including even decolonizing budgeting. What do you prioritize? What do you don't prioritize? We were trying to have this big transformation plan to change all that. But the other challenge which faced us at the University of South Africa was the high failure rate. And the issue was then, how do we rectify that? One suggestion was that let's check what are the causes of this high failure rate. Is it the languages which are used in the answering the question during exams, or that? And the College of Education allowed itself to be the guinea pig to experiment that in that year we tried to say let's translate all the exam papers into the 11 South African languages and see and then allow students to attempt the questions from whatever language they wanted, whether is Zulu or Sotho or Ndebele or unfortunately I had to leave before I realized whether I participated in the assessment, whether it improved the pass rate. And that to me was an attempt to also drive towards dealing with the issues of what is it that we assess when we are saying what doing assessment. There is one problem in which English, French, Portuguese, all these six, they've been elevated to knowledge itself rather than communication. And if you don't know them, therefore you know nothing. I think in assessment, that is one aspect which I will give really as a practical example of what we need to think about deeply.
Thank you so much. Any other question? Any other question, colleagues? Oh, I see Yvette.
Prof Sabelo, what would you say you believe is the link between decolonization and technology?
Yeah, of course, there are a lot of linkages. One of the linkages is that in fact, let me not even talk about linkages. Is what is the attitude towards technology? And the one issue is that there are people who think that decolonization is against technology. I don't think that is the correct understanding. The issue is that we are thinking about technology in the same manner we are thinking about other things. But how do we make it relevant? How do we make it part of us? How do we indigenize it? How do we make it really work for us in such a way that it does not become an instrument of the cognitive empire, and that it does not become really part of technologies of coloniality of knowledge? So that is the way we think about it.
Yes, indeed. I'm going to request Reverend Deboho, and then followed by Richard Mwamba. The two of you, if you could pose your questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prof. A question that I have is, what is the relationship between decolonization and ethics in the study of ethics? Because when we look at ethics, the ethical theories that are there, predominantly there, are Eurocentric ethics, you know, like utilitarian and many others. But when we try to move to an African ethic like Ubuntu, it has been, it has been completely stripped of what it is. It doesn't even look like Ubuntu anymore. And you find scholars like Metz and having Metz's Ubuntu. It just doesn't make sense. And yet again, the tools that are there to critique this kind of ethic are from the West. How do we build a relationship of decolonizing and ethics. I'm finding that very difficult because currently there is no African ethic that can be authentically used.
Yeah, that's an important and a very difficult question, Reverend Tebo. But I think in your question you also really began to problematize it. That the challenge from a decolonial point of view, you are talking about ethics grounded in which civilization, in which histories. I think that is very important. And one of the task of decolonizing is really recovery of the civilizations, the histories, the cosmologies, so that we re-anchor what we are talking about in terms of ethics. But there is also another dimension, particularly to ethics, which is a very, very clear one in the decolonial work. The ethics in terms of when you say what ethics do you practice when you do research, and the ethics there are very clear. You need to approach people as people, not as objects of research. You need also to avoid extraction. You need also to engage in subject to subject relations, which actually lead to co-production of knowledge. That area is the area which I'm more familiar with, in which we really bring the ethics. And we always talk in decolonial cycles about decolonial love. That when the love of what was considered native, what was considered black, what was considered to be not human, you need to enter into that with that ethic of love. So I will remain there. But I think if you are working in the area of ethics, it is important really to shift the geography of ethics. And when I was saying shifting the geography of ethics, don't draw ethics as though they all come from European civilization, and Arab civilization has no ethical basis. And you shift also the biography of the writings on ethics, not to rely mainly on the Eurocentric scholars, and they bring other scholars. There is ethics from humanist scholarship, there is ethics from gender scholarship, there is ethics from indigenous scholars. So we need to do a number of things there to try to rectify that.
Thank you so much. Richard?
Okay. You can hear me?
Yes.
Yes, please.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Prof, for the wonderful presentation. My question is about the decolonization of the university. One important aspect about decolonization of the university is actually the inclusion of representation of the global south. And that is in terms of the curriculum, medium of instruction, as well as institutional culture. But then the question that I have regards the institutional culture, because when you look at the people, lecturers, and those in administration at the university, are people who are experts in the epistemologies of the global north. But then in the global south, we have also experts there. And for instance, if I'm talking about experts in indigenous knowledge systems from the African point of view, I can talk about kings, chiefs, these traditional leaders. Okay, but then these are not included in the university. So I would like to hear from you. What is your comment really about the institutional culture of the university, and how best can the global south be represented in that aspect? If at all there is something that needs to be changed, I mean.
Yeah, thank you for that important question. I think the starting point about decolonizing the university is really to rethink the very idea of the university. I think it was Justin at the beginning when he talked about university in Africa and African university. Perhaps the universities which we have at the moment are universities in Africa. They are not yet African universities. And what do we mean by that? We mean universities which actually throw their strength from where they are located, and they are responsive to the location in which they are located. But the question of institutional cultures is the most difficult, particularly if you try to change institutional cultures by the very people whom I will describe as implicated subjects, a person like me and you. We are actually produced by what we are trying to change. So this is where our difficulty is. So it means, first of all, we need to do really a personal, individual introspection, deep introspection, and a deep unlearning in order to change things. Because if we try to change things as we are now, we are sometimes more Eurocentric than Europeans. So it's very important really to think that way. The second issue which arises from your question, I think representation is fine, but it is a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. Because when we say representation, we just diversify ourselves, black, yellow, brown, women, men, within structures which are not transformed. Even if we are so diverse, as long as we don't take really courage to change the structures of power. And that moves beyond representation. It actually takes us to what we call there's academic freedom, then there's democratization. And the democratization means you democratize institutions like structures like the Senate, structures like the university councils, structures like the committees. Who sits in those committees? It's a very practical way in which you really democratize the university. But when we talk about institutional cultures, we also talk about they are Eurocentric, they are patriarchal, they are sexist characters. And that will not be an event. It will actually be a process. And because universities, from my experience, as I said, I worked in the Vice Chancellor's office, universities are very complex institutions. And like all institutions, they will tell you that, no, we are decolonizing, when in reality they mean they are absorbing decolonization into their ways of doing, and they perpetuate themselves. So when I worked in the Vice Chancellor's issues, which I spent most of the time doing, was that you needed to produce an institutional transformation strategy. And I sat down with my colleagues to produce that institutional transformation strategy. Then the second demand was that, oh, you have produced it. Oh, yes, you need to socialize it. What does socializing it mean? It means you must present it to all the concerned stakeholders and the stockholders of the university. So you take almost half a year going to committee by committee presenting that. You are given comments here, you are given comments there. By the time it is accepted, it is not what you intended. You get the result. It is, by the time it is accepted at the Senate, it is no longer what you started with. That is how institutions eat into the radical ideas and discipline them into status quo. And this is the difficulty in transforming institutional cultures within universities, because everything needs to be taken through the committees of the university. And the committees of the university, no, change here, change there, change there, change there. If you continuously agree to change, obviously they are rewriting the document. And by the time it is accepted, you are even fearing to be associated with it. This is how difficult it is to transform universities. Itumeleng is still there. He can actually share the experiences. But the other part, which I wanted also to comment on, you consistently use the word experts. I'm very uncomfortable about that concept, because I think the idea of experts, people who know, we're trying here to think about knowledge for life. We're trying to think about education for life. And education for life needs to be driven by what we call students of society, not experts. Experts are a problem because experts, they sit above our heads. They are a minority, they know it all, they must educate the rest of society. But the rest of society is a school in itself, and we need to approach it that way. So we need really to climb from our horses and become students of society if we want really to unfold effective change. And this takes me to your idea about the chiefs and all this. First of all, again, we need to be careful because what we call chiefs today are inventions of colonialism. So there is invention of tradition. What we call tradition is an invention of colonialism. So we need to really to do a thoroughgoing assessment to understand that is this really the notion of chiefs today, is it reflective of really a representative of the people, or is an institution which was created by colonialism, which actually tapped into tradition, converted it for colonial purposes. So that way, it's very important that we become careful. But at the same time, it means that we move out of the university to learn from society. Knowledge does not lie in the university.
Thank you so much. I'm going to request that, because of looking at the time, I'm going to request that my brother Sabelo, we take the 3 questions. I had one myself, but we took the 3 questions all in one, then we can respond to all of them. I'll start with Luluma.
Thank you so much. I was about to position myself as a student, but hearing you speak about experts, I withdraw. I really like the way you positioned decolonization as an ecology of knowledges or universal knowledge. I work for a school, and we are currently attempting to decolonize our curriculum as part of our strategic planning. But one of the headaches we have or are facing is the notion of the universality of certain knowledges. To make an example, or a silly example, is the law of gravity, which is considered to be an universal knowledge or truth. And hearing you speak, I got a sense that there is a danger in elevating certain knowledges over others. Then I'm wondering what would be an advice for us on how to navigate such problems as like 1 + 1 is always 2. That's universal truth. And somebody coming with a different view, how do we navigate those discussions? Thank you.
Okay. Then I think it was Linditlo.
Thank you, Professor Sabelo, for the presentation. I'm within the quality assurance space, and I'm wondering to what extent does quality assurance as a process provide the opportunity for us to then move towards where we're wanting to go as within the continent, as a South African university, whether private or public. Is it helpful or not at all? That would be my question. Thank you.
Okay. I think also, please, if I pronounce your name wrong, please forgive me, and I hope your ancestors will do the same. Jesse?
Thank you, Prof. And thank you very much for your powerful presentation. Prof, I'm a student. I need more clarification from you here. Would you please try to elaborate on the African criteria that can be used in order to talk about true knowledge? Because what is behind that also is I'm struggling a bit here. I want to know if it's really possible to have an epistemology that is specifically African after all that Africa has experienced in history and even in this modern culture. If it's possible, do we have some criteria that can help us to identify true knowledge? And if they are, how far are you scholars, African scholars, how far are you with the work of building or reconstructing an African epistemology?
Over to you, Prof.
All right. And these are important questions. Let me start with one on quality assurance space, because that is very specific, and I know exactly we always say some spaces are highly regulated because of the regulations which emerge from these bodies like SAPA and the others, and I think one of the issues which we must not lose sight of is when we have these discussions on decolonization, they must not be confined to the university itself only. It won't succeed because as Lindy, you are talking about, you are from quality assurance spaces. The issue is it needs really to have, this debate needs to percolate into other structures. I remember when I was in South Africa, I went to present at the Central University of Technology in Bloemfontein. And during that week, they were being assessed by quality assurance bodies. And I didn't know that they were being assessed. So I went there, I gave my keynote address. And only after I had done that, that's when somebody came to me and said, no, as for me, I'm from South. And this is my first time to hear somebody saying all these things. And the good which came out of that dialogue is that that was in December. That was in December, and the person from SAPA said, I listened to your presentation. Next year in January, we will invite you to address SAPA so that you present these type of arguments to the SAPA staff so that they also understand. And the SAPA becomes important because it controls the certification. Take, for instance, we do decolonize. As I suggested, we do destroy the disciplinary base of knowledge within universities. But the SAPA still certificates along the lines of disciplines. You see the mismatch which can happen. We will actually be accused of actually violating some regulations if we don't have a dialogue which actually also touches on SAPA to understand that you can certificate beyond disciplines. So to me, I thought that was a really a practical question, which actually says when we talk about decolonization, it even goes to the extent of saying, can you have decolonized university within a neoliberal state, for instance? Or you need also to have dialogue with the state, with the Minister of Education. And stakeholders and the stockholders within the chain. Only that way will you have really a successful decolonization. This one, which is confined to the universities, this is a starting point, but it needs to be escalated into all the structures and the chains. that is my suggestion. And then for Jesse, about true knowledge, the issue is that the idea of truth, objectivity, we don't want to throw it away. But what we want to say to one another is that it is an aspiration, it is not yet a reality. It's an aspiration which we don't know whether we will attain it. But what we are then exploring are various pathways towards truth. And one of the pathways which is offered by the decolonial work, which also will answer Lelume's question, is that I think the best way to arrive to think from where you are. It is that thinking from where you are, and secondly, think as yourself. And be truthful first to yourself before you engage on anything. You don't want to lie to yourself, and then you think you will then produce truthful knowledge. There is no way you can do that. So this idea of thinking from where we are is really about also about practical issues. A practical issue like, what is the normal cognitive process? The normal cognitive process is from known to the unknown. You can't have a cognitive process which starts from the unknown to the known. That will confuse everything. So it's important that what we are trying to do is to reposition ourselves in the universe in relation to others. So in other words, you even get an example of what happened in Nairobi in 1968, 1969, the Nairobi memo. Some call it the abolition of English department. But there, what they were saying is, let's reconfigure the English department. And the reconfiguring it means that it must start with the literatures of Kenya, going to literatures of Africa, literatures of the global south, and then end with the literatures of Europe. Not vice versa, where you are in Kenya but you start with Shakespeare. If you do that, then you are starting somewhere else. So the processes are many which we need to engage with in order to arrive in what we call truth. Of course, there are various regimes of truth. Was it not Michel Foucault who talked about regimes of truth, that there is not a singular truth? Really, it depends. Whose truth are you talking about? The indigenous people who survived genocide, whose land was taken, they have a particular truth which emerges from traumatic experience, from genocide. And they have a particular truth that without our land, we are not ourselves. So you need to think about truth anchored in your histories and your experiences. This is why when I started with the basic epistemological questions, I was saying, where does the question of experience, the question of biography fits in the knowledge? And if you locate yourself, think as yourself, think from where you are, and make sure that I'm raising this argument because of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. For instance, we have this debate about modernity. Decolonial thinkers, they say modernity has an underside, and the underside is very dead. The underside is dominated by enslavement, racism, sexism, feminization, exploitation. But there is the other side, which is very bright side. And then we are always confused when people say we're rejecting modernity. That is not what we're doing. We're saying, but let's not just celebrate it. Let's actually unmask it, that it has this good side and this bad side. And that way, we are nearer to the truth than to just say it is a good thing. That's to me an example which I can give. Thank you so much.
Wow, thank you so much. I think in a nutshell is we need to be deliberate. We need to be deliberate, and we need to really embrace pluriversality. That's one of the things that we ought to do as scholars, to embrace pluriversality, to appreciate other knowledges, and allow them to be on the same level as the knowledges that have for decades monopolized that space. And the decentralization of Western epistemology does not mean the removal of Western epistemology, but it is about creating a coexisting space for all epistemologies, not one epistemology over the others. And I think,
and I must say, Itumeleng, that when Jesse was asking about, can we really think about African epistemologies after the experiences which we went through? I think one issue for certain, we mustn't also give an impression that colonialism destroyed everything. It intended to destroy everything.
intended to do so.
It intended, but we remained. That's why you are here. That's why the spiritualities still exist. So this is why there is borderless thinking from the borders. We needed to recover from what is remaining and think from there into the center.
Yes, and that is why oral knowledge is very important in us understanding this multifaceted of knowledge. Colleagues, myself and Sabelo, if we were to talk, we will talk for the longest of time as decolonial scholars ourselves. I'll now hand over to Professor Terry. If you could come in, please, to do the vote of thanks, and be appreciative that I stick to time, at least for 1 minute before the end. Prof?
Thank you very, very much. I want to first thank all my colleagues and students and fellow travelers on the journey to search for truth in our contexts and how we are limited in our understanding, but trying to unmask and to move closer and closer to the truth as we want to understand it and see it. And thanks for everybody being here to journey with us on that. And also to thank Professor Itumeleng Mothoagae, who is a senator here at St. Augustine, and we're very proud and appreciative of your contribution to the shaping of our intellectual project here at St. Augustine. And Professor Sabelo, I want to thank you, and I know that I'm going to use a colonial metaphor, but it felt very powerful to me that I was like the widow, just knocking on the door and knocking on the door and knocking on the door, and eventually you opened it, and I held you to it, and I really am so touched by your humanity, by your humility, by your joy at finding new connections in the world of ideas, and always maintaining a sense of self in that. And I draw a lot from your being and your spirituality and the way you conduct yourself as an academic. I draw a lot of inspiration, and know that you are a treasure in our lives. Even though you're working far away, even though we had you online, it was a wonderful experience, and I'm really, truly grateful on all our behalf that you did agree and you have done this, and it's very precious to us. And you are a national and continental treasure. Thank you very, very much.
No, thank you.
Thank you very much, and colleagues, have a wonderful evening, and
thank you. Good night.
See you soon. I'll be in Germany next month. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Sure. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.